I've always wanted to write a book. Maybe you have too. When I was a kid, I made these little pop up picture books, and in fifth grade, I wrote an embarrassing crossover of Pokemon, Zelda, and Star Trek. Please don't ask. By high school, I was constantly doing text based role playing online, and in college, I wrote a Digimon fanfic. But the story that I always wanted to write, the one that was like near and dear to my heart, is called Spark Bomb. And that name probably doesn't mean anything to you, especially if this is my first video you're seeing. And in the world of AI, it might be a name that never means anything to you. You probably know someone like me. Maybe you are someone like me. You've had this story floating around in your head for as long as you can remember, and some parts of it are crystal clear, and some parts of it still need some work, some refinement. And there's probably a good measure of writer's block in there too, because when isn't there writer's block, right? Maybe you're disheartened because traditional publishing is more competitive than ever. And self-publishing is an option, but it means that you're doing all of your own marketing and you just want to focus on the fun part, the writing. On top of all this, we've got AI. And because of AI, I've realized that there's no way to prove that my own writing is my own writing anymore. I can't even prove that my notes are my own. I wrote a thorough history on Spark Bomb a decade plus ago, but it's a computer file. And there's no way for me to actually prove that the file was first made when I made it. That's what we're staring down. Right now, there's this sense that we recognize AI when we see it. But we know that AI is getting better. And unless you're one of the people who thinks that AI will flat out never match human creativity, and maybe it will never fully match human creativity, you do know that we're on a clock of to some degree or another. We've got this dialogue about AI generated and AI assisted, but it ignores AI researched and AI edited and AI translated and AI collaborated. The language hasn't been invented yet to really map out the system. And what that means for any kind of publishing is that we're stuck on this honor system of authors disclosing what they use AI for. And I hate that because honor systems suck. When I was in high school, everyone openly cheated on assignments. When I was in college, cheating was more of a don't ask, don't tell, don't get caught kind of a thing. And outside college, in the real world, if you'd asked me a month ago, I would have said AI's got nothing on humans. It's generic, it's bland, it's obvious. You know it when you see it. But then I started playing around with AI for the first time in a year plus. And for fun, I made this world building prompt. I stumbled into it because I want to I enjoy world building exercises. It's fun to just take an idea, run with it, and see where it ends up just because. And going through that process and seeing the results that were possible with AI, it was sobering, it was terrifying, it was uncanny. I was still in the driver's seat. That's how it feels to use it. I'm still the one making the decisions. And it's like AI is enhancing my natural creativity. But it's AI use. And it's easy. And if I was able to build a tool like this so casually, then someone could obviously make a much better tool if they were motivated to do so. And if that influenced their writing in some way, in any way, it would be impossible to notice. And that means that if I'm looking at even the best writers in the industry, I don't know whether they used AI or not. I trust that they didn't, but that's an honor system. That's me making a guess. I assume they didn't. But what's it mean for, authors lower down the totem pole? If I see some random new author's story, I don't have an opinion about them yet. I don't know whether they used AI or they didn't, or how or where. I'm trusting whatever they say. And if I'm trusting that, then if I publish something tomorrow, how is anyone supposed to trust me? How is anyone supposed to trust you if you're writing something? Now, maybe you already think that using AI in creative work at all is categorically wrong. You're not allowed to use it. Doesn't matter. Even for research, you can't use it. And that's fine. I've heard that position from a lot of people, a lot of friends. But at that point, how do you verify whether someone did or didn't use AI? I don't see any way that you can. And for something like the prompt that I made, it's a process. It's not going to show in the written work itself. Like I said, it feels like I'm the one in this creative driver's seat. Or to phrase it differently, it's like using AI normally feels like you're hiring a tour guide. And that tour guide is going to take you down this set path and point out set landmarks. It's going to say, here's a character you're going to include, and here's a city you're going to include, and let me make all the decisions for you because you don't need to think for yourself. But you can get AI to behave more like a local who's like, hey, we're gonna go grab dinner. I know you're new in town. We've got this great Mexican place a couple blocks down. We've got this pizza place down on the corner that's really good. Or if you want to try something else, just like throw out a food and I'll take you somewhere fantastic that you've never been before, that you wouldn't have seen on the tour. This is going to be a long video, and it's going to be a long video because I want to show you the process of what I'm actually talking about, what this actually looks like. I'm starting with no actual specific world building idea. I'm going to start from scratch. I'm going to make something, and by the end of it, I think it's going to look creative and original because that's been the case every single time I've done this. And it's going to happen not because AI is going to tell me this is what you're going to do. It's going to happen because AI is going to hold a mirror up, tell me this is what I'm hearing from you, and it's going to kind of point me at roads. It's going to be like, well, you could head east right now, and there might be a forest that way. Or you could head west, and there might be another city block. I still don't feel like I'm doing it justice. It feels like if you're in the room with a friend who you're just bouncing ideas off of, and maybe they don't totally care about what you're bouncing ideas off of, but they're going to give you some good feedback and give you a sense of what you're actually saying. Whereas as writers, we're stuck in our own heads all the time. And it's not going to be the usual AI case where it's like, here's a checklist of tropes that you need to fulfill for your story. So I'm going to be very open about the process itself, but I want to keep the prompt hidden. And I want to do that for the very simple reason that I don't know how I feel about this yet. I don't want to put a tool out there for people who don't realize this is possible to make it easier and make the situation worse that much quicker, because as far as I can tell, no one's talking about this yet. And like I was saying, every idea I've come up with using this prompt, it's felt fresh, it's felt original. And there's this weird line that I'm not sure if I'm crossing or not crossing or about to cross. And so every time I use it, I just try to start with a fresh idea that I don't care about, so that when it's all done, I can just kind of, wash my hands of it and not think about it. But I also can't help thinking about it, because if I'm able to do this just for fun, on a whim, somebody who wants to do this and get published and get paid for it and not disclose it could do that so easily. And I would never know, and I don't think you would ever know either. And so that's kind of the conversation I want to have. Is there a space for ethical AI use in creative work? Is it limited to AI research? Does it include the kind of thing I'm about to show you? Is it somewhere messier? Because it feels really messy. And so many people I've talked to so far are just like, AI bad, AI good. And that doesn't feel like a complicated enough answer, or it doesn't feel like it's addressing just how complicated that things really are. So I'm going to jump into it. And the prompt is designed to give me some starting seeds. These are very open-ended ideas. It's kind of like, oh, you're going to have a chosen one who's going to save the world. That doesn't tell you where to write a story. It's like that archetypical hero's journey kind of thing, right? Except it's going to be a little bit better than that. The point is, I don't want you to get caught up on the seeds themselves. I've already had some feedback to the seeds are generated and that's already generation. And if that's where your hard line is, that's fine. Whether you think it's open-ended enough to make them justified, that's fine. What I care about is the process that's going to follow. And that's the thing that I don't think people realize is as possible and accessible as it is. Because this is a prompt that I've built in a way that you could go in with a starting point. You could have a story about time travel where someone's trying to improve his best friend's life or something, and the process would still fire off of that just fine. In other words, the whole process is kind of AI holding up a mirror to you, showing your rear view mirror, showing the side mirrors, but also pointing out the different roads you could take. So thank you if you stick around. I'm very curious to hear what you think. Meanwhile, since this is, of course, a video about AI, the music in this video was made by one Johnny Bailey, a lo-fi artist, and these songs were released before AI music generation was getting common. But also, it's one of those kind of things where even though I trust Johnny Bailey, can you trust Johnny Bailey? Like, oh, gosh, man, it's such a weird... I don't know what to make of this, but we're going to go ahead and jump in. It's going to give the seeds. So we're just going to go ahead and say, please give me a list of seeds to consider. All right. So I'm just going to go ahead and read off the seeds. Whether you think these are open-ended enough or not, we'll just kind of see what you think. So we have a system where the cost is borne by someone who wasn't there for the benefit. The debt moves, whether that's across time, geography, or category of person. What looks like a free resource to one party has already been paid for by another who had no say in the transaction. Very open-ended idea, very interestingly specific. Two groups who share a survival dependency but have organized their lives around denying it. The dependency is real and structural. The denial is also real. Not ignorance, but active maintenance. They have developed separate origin stories, separate calendars, separate names for the same river. Another seed. A place that exists because of a catastrophe that no one remembers correctly. The founding event has been mythologized differently by different inheritors, but the physical or social structure of the place still bears the actual shape of what happened. Readable if you know how to look. Another seed. What gets counted and what doesn't. Some form of record keeping, census, ledger, map, ritual inventory that defines who and what exists officially. The gaps aren't accidents. Another seed, the practice that has outlasted its original function and developed a second one. The original purpose is gone or changed beyond recognition. The practice persists because it now does different work. Social, psychological, political. No one has formally reassigned it. So the list goes on a bit. You can read it on the screen if you want to. And the idea here is just to kind of get the creative juices flowing. Whether you think that these ideas are too specific already and that already invalidates them, the question that's kind of in my mind is this doesn't feel different from one of those lists where it's like pick and choose these three things and fit them all together. It doesn't feel that different to me from the writing advice that I was used to following, which is take two unique ideas that are interesting to you and tie them together. Let's go ahead and just, let's try to pick two of these and weave them together because I'm going to go ahead and follow my own path. So we have a place that exists because of a catastrophe that no one remembers correctly. So, and we'll go with a system where the cost is borne by someone who wasn't there for the benefit. So what I immediately think of, right? And you're going to be seeing my creative processing firing through this, and I doubt that your creative process is that different from mine. Like if you're a creative type, you should be able to follow along well enough, provided I explain myself well enough. So we have a lot of mythologies where like one of the gods pays a price for something, right? You have the boulder getting pushed up the road eternally or that sort of thing. Let's we're going with a place with a catastrophe. So something ancient happened and there was some sort of cost paid for that. So we'll weave these together. Let's try to think of something specific here. Let's have time displacement, a person or group, a person, perhaps an immortal. Let's tentatively say a person or group paid a price to leave their current time and they were pushed forward in time to the future. This decision avoided an apocalyptic event. Very, very basic, very, very bare bones. Let's go ahead and just show how it responds. AI trying to glaze me as usual. Let me reflect back what I'm hearing before going anywhere with it. The catastrophe seed is about a place whose structure still bears the shape of what happened, readable if you know how to look. The cost displacement seed is about a debt that moves, where the beneficiary and the payer are separate. What you've sketched joins them in an interesting way. The catastrophe was averted, which means it exists in a strange epistemic state. It didn't happen, but it almost happened, and something was spent to prevent it. The people living in the aftermath inherited a world that was saved by someone who is either still present, the immortal, or whose descendants are still present, the group. I'm thinking we have somebody go forward in time. That's kind of my tentative thought. In the future they didn't choose and may not recognize. A few tensions that I noticed that seem to be load bearing before we go further, and this is the point where it kind of points out like the possible consequences. Not like specific stuff necessarily, but just some like very obvious follow through points, right? So who knows what was paid? If the immortal survived into the future, then they carry the knowledge of the original transaction. They remember what happened, right? That's a very different world than one where the pairs were scattered, died, or forgot. The immortal as living record changes the social texture considerably. Because somebody or a group is getting pushed ahead into the future, they have that past knowledge. Maybe what happened over the course of 100 years, 1,000 years while they were gone. And the obvious question, what does push forward feel like from the inside? I didn't start to think about what it might feel like. Was this like an uncomfortable thing? Was it just a magic snap of the fingers? They moved through time. Was it experience of sacrifice, escape, exile, or something without a clean emotional frame? How the pairs understood their own displacement shapes what was passed on or didn't. Who are the inheritors? And do they know they owe a debt? The people were living, they survived. Did their descendants stick around? Did they get conquered? Is the history even known of what happened? Like, was this, maybe this was a local, isolated kind of an incident, right? I still haven't narrowed in on like the exact thought, but you can see me circling around. You can see me narrowing in on an idea just off of how vague the seed is itself. The place itself, is it a single location? Or is it, more diffuse? And so let's go ahead and start. Let's try to shape some ideas together. The immortal, like we could do a reincarnation route. That's always a possibility here, where maybe they were sacrificed or something like that, and they're going to be reincarnated in the future. And the reincarnation itself is a price. Maybe that goes against like their religious beliefs, where you're meant to pass on to the next life. And so maybe it was a sacrifice that way. And I like the idea that they're immortals. The immortals were sent directly forward in time. Maybe 100 years, maybe 1,000. There's a clean continuity. Let's go ahead and have it be a clean continuity from their perspective. One moment they were in their present, the next moment they're in the future or current present. And let's see, what should have happened to the descendants? Let's have the descendants have forgotten. The descendants of those who survived the apocalyptic event don't remember what happened. It's become mythology in some shape or form. Maybe the immortals are portrayed as deities. Maybe they weren't immortal beforehand. What do we got here? What was the other thing? I mean, we got the location as well that matters. Apocalypse level event would have affected the continent, at least the continent. Payment took place in a specific city. Maybe that city is in ruins now. Maybe its people scattered to the countryside. There are still established cities and societies on this continent, but the original city itself may even be a part of the legend or mythology. So we're narrowing in, we're circling in on something, and it's going to mirror it back at me again. It's like pointing out road signs. The displacement was instantaneous from the pair's perspective, no experience of the intervening time, no witness to what their sacrifice produced. They arrived in a future, relative to them, that has already processed their absence, already built mythology around them. That's a specific kind of orientation. Not just the world has changed, but the world has already finished grieving you and moved on, and also made you into something you don't recognize. And there's an interesting tension right there is, let's say that you decide that in order to save like your family or whatever, right? You get pushed forward 100 years into the future, and suddenly you're in a world that you don't recognize, you don't know what's going on, and you start to hear this myth that sounds like really familiar, but like it's definitely not quite right. It's like it reminds you of something, but it doesn't. You realize eventually that it's a myth about your own story, about what happened. And because it's a myth, because they're getting so many details about it wrong, you don't actually know what happened to the friends and family you left behind. They're gone somewhere. They're in the past. You might have descendants out there, you might not, and that would be an interesting thing too, especially if you're a person who cared about legacy. The immortality question is interesting and still open. You're suggesting they may not have been immortal before, which means the displacement itself may have done something to them, or the condition of the payment changed them. Immortality was my first thought. AI is kind of just wondering if I'm following through on it or not, right? Because I've only told the AI what I've told it, whereas I'm telling you my thought process out loud as it happens. The city is both the site of the payment and potentially the site of the near catastrophe, or those might be two different places. That's an interesting point. I'm a big Final Fantasy VII fan. Meteor was going to hit the whole planet. Was Meteor focused on Midgard or the Northern Crater? I always forgot. I know the past Meteor was Northern Crater. Anyway, the question of where this catastrophe, what the catastrophe looked like, maybe it's, some flood mythology we could go into. Maybe we can go ahead and have like catastrophic meteor. Maybe it's something else. I don't know. We're still figuring that out. That's part of the fun of world building. The scattered population is interesting. The survivors didn't stay, which means the mythology didn't develop at the site. Now, this AI is trying to read ahead a little bit. Maybe it did. Maybe the city survived for like 900 out of 1,000 years, and it's just the past, 100 years it changed. I haven't decided yet. I'm figuring that out too. The ruins exist, but the story keepers are somewhere else. The gap between the physical site and the narrative site opens something. The continental scale of the averted event implies the rest of the continent benefited and has no idea. Or maybe they did have an idea. That's an interesting question there is, has this mythology spread throughout the entire continent? Is this a very, how does this look like? And that's actually the thing that I think is really interesting to me. I'm just going to jot down a fable in the response notes, because that's the part that I actually want to really latch onto is like, what does this story look like in the present day? One thing I want to flag as possibly load bearing, the time gap. 100 years means the immortals arrived into a world with living institutional memory, maybe even surviving witnesses, definitely surviving political structures. 1,000 years means they arrived as strangers to everything, possibly not even speaking a recognizable language. So maybe we need something in the middle. Like I want the language to still be recognizable because obviously in most stories you're going to hand wave that. Like, oh, we have some time travel. We're going to ignore the fact that if you went back in time 1,000 years, English doesn't sound like English anymore. It's weird. Let's go with a number of 100 years. The exact amount is still to be determined. The immortal, and I'm not sure if it's going to be one or several, probably several. Let's have it be several. The immortals arrive into this new present day and can still communicate effectively. The language hasn't changed enough. Maybe they sound old-fashioned to the new natives. So I want to explore the mythology and the fable. One interesting question that comes into my mind immediately is, where do we end up? Did the mythology stay localized to near that city? Did it end up moving? You know, is like the source of the mythology on the opposite side of the continent? That'd be really interesting. Like the story takes place on like the East Coast, and it turns out that on the West Coast now is kind of treated as the origin of this. And I think that's actually a really interesting contradiction. The original site is on the eastern seaboard of this continent. The mythology, as far as our society knows, originated on the western seaboard. The reason, presumably, sometime after the event, the storytellers or believers or whatever you want to call, whatever we'll call them, ended up relocating. So very simple idea, very simple shift here. So we have now a geographical reversal, and this is the kind of thing that like AI wouldn't do normally. AI is going to suggest like the most generic path possible if you're just talking to an AI normally. Whereas here, like this is why I say the ideas feel like they're mine. I just decided, hey, you know, normally the source of mythology, like a mythology spreads out from its source. In this case, we're now saying, no, it happened over there instead. I don't even think there was anything in here that really gave me that idea other than that I kind of thought like, oh, let's have it be a continent. Let's have it be a significant time gap. I don't think there was anything in here that really pointed me at that. Like that, is that idea mine? Is that idea AI's? Is it some weird hybrid ground in the middle? Like that's the kind of thing I'm asking here that I wanted to think about at the start of this. The mythology originated in its current form, in its culturally legible form, on the opposite coast of where the event actually happened. That means whenever the survivors carried west, it traveled the full width of a continent before it stabilized into the version that got passed down. For those who know their biblical history, for example, it's really fascinating that like Jesus' story took place in Israel, in Jerusalem, but it's Paul's travels to Rome that really let Christianity spread. It's almost a parallel of that in a way, right? We've got this kind of real world analog there. Just because like a story starts in one place doesn't mean that's where it kind of ends up. For some reason, some of the survivors traveled west. That's a definite established thing. The story arrives transformed by every community that hosted it along the way. I mean, I didn't say that. We'll see if I go with that or not, because that's an interesting question. Who did the original facilitators of this mythology meet with along the way, and how did that shape the story? Because the story needs to be wrong. The story needs to be just a little bit too incorrect, you know, to be interesting, I think. So the mythology the immortals encounter when they arrive isn't just faded or simplified. It may be inverted in places or displaced onto geography that had nothing to do with the original event. That's an interesting point, because how did a story getting told? We're on a coastal world, right? Let's say there's a mountain region somewhere in the middle of the continent. How do you adapt a story that has potentially a coastal context into a mountainous context or a highlands context? If you're in the highlands, you're not gonna have to worry about a flood, for example. Like let's say the catastrophe was a flood. Let's say it was global warming. The seas are going to rise. If you're up in the mountains, you don't care about that. Like how do you even adapt that? It's what, just like some sort of insane rainfall, some sort of like massive mudslides or something? Did it become earthquakes? The Western Coast may have landmarks, sacred sites, architectural traditions that are organized around a story that actually belongs to the East. The Immortals land presumably near or at the original Eastern site, which I like that idea. As they just get passed forward, they end up, the city is in ruins around them, and they're just like, oh no. Like that seems like a really good, interesting point for whether this is like a story or like a TV show or a movie or whatever path we could take. And so this might be a place that's regarded as like historically empty, cursed, forgotten. Cursing is always good. This idea that you have this like this kind of buried, ruinous city, and it's believed to be cursed, so nobody goes near it. Like, why is it believed to be cursed? Does that tie into the mythology at all? Like that's a really interesting point to follow up on. So that's kind of where I want to go with this. So the question is, what is the eastern site now? Is it ruins, wilderness, a living city built over the old one? Also an interesting possibility. Place where people avoid without knowing why? Did the survivors travel west deliberately, following something, fleeing something, pulled by a belief system, or was it something gradual or unplanned? And how many immortals? Let's tentatively say a group of 7 immortals. 7's always a good number. It's always a really interesting dynamic. 5 would be another good number. 3 could work. I don't know. Let's tentatively say 7. The idea that the original city is now in ruins and is believed to be cursed is a good one. So there should be a settlement nearby for the immortals to discover once they arrive, but these locals would believe the ruins are haunted. What else can we go with here? We have the whole inversion idea of the lay of the land. So let's go ahead and say somewhere in the middle of the continent is a mountain range. Perhaps that influenced the mythology. So maybe the original event was a threat of flood or tsunami or some water-related catastrophe. And maybe the mythology instead discusses mudslides or earthquakes or mountains rising or falling. And I kind of like the idea of the mythology being farther back. Maybe there even was a catastrophe that followed at the site of the city after the apocalyptic event was averted. That would provide a reason for survivors to travel west. I decided East Coast, right? For the original one, they travel from the east to the west and the mythology came from the east. Let's actually make it more interesting. Let's say that there's only 6 characters in the mythology. 6 of the 7 immortals. And I don't know why one has been dropped yet. Like, that's a really interesting question. Maybe the storyteller who passed the mythology along during the Western travel didn't like one of the immortals and left them out of the story. This is still tentative. I don't know. We're still kind of thinking out loud. So we have 7 people who make a payment, and the AI is kind of stuck on the idea of this being a payment. And I haven't thought about that, like, because the payment to me is just they get sent into the future. They leave their families behind. And maybe I should explicitly just state that that's the payment at this point. So have that be a follow-up, because I just feel weird calling that. That doesn't feel like a payment to me. That's not the language I would use to describe it, even though it clearly is. So the coastal eastern city is destroyed or abandoned afterward, possibly by a second catastrophe, a real one. Flood or tsunami was the residue or echo of the averted larger event. The survivors travel west carrying the story. Somewhere in the journey, they cross a mountain range, and the mountain range becomes the dominant metaphor. The story gets translated into the language of earth and stone rather than water. By the time it stabilizes on the western coast, it's a different kind of disaster being described. The water is gone from the telling. The mountains didn't actually cause anything, it's just that they became a filter through which it got passed through. The AI just kind of bounced my own idea back at me. I'm trying to keep this going at a quick enough pace because I know this is going to drag long. I want to get this to crystallize in some clear directions. The 7 becoming 6 in the mythology is interesting. Omission could be editorial, a deliberate erasure by someone with a reason, dislike, which was the idea I threw out, or something else changed. Maybe there's betrayal, disagreement, something else. It could be structural. Maybe, and this is something I hadn't considered right here. This is one of those cases where this is something like might be an idea that originates with AI, but I might latch onto it. Maybe something about this mountain culture, this number 6 is significant to them. It's like a sacred number, or it matches their founding families. That's actually that's a specific example. I'm kind of annoyed that my prompt is giving me that specific of an example, but it's an interesting point. Something culturally significant to them. Something that made 6 feel complete and 7 feel wrong. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe the storyteller just forgot about the 7th, or maybe the story got passed along to somebody else who was retelling what they remembered, and the 7th person was forgotten. That's an interesting idea as well. I do like the idea that it's an intentional cultural reason, though. Obviously, these produce different situations when the 7 arrive in the present, because for whoever is left out, they're just like, well, why didn't I get included? And maybe there's no historical record of why they didn't get included, and they're just like, well, that sucks. Like, how would you feel? Like, you save the world, you save your family, you get flung into the future. People remember kind of the story a little bit, but they don't remember you. They remember everybody else but you. How's that feel? I think it would suck, but it's interesting though. It's an interesting space. The question of which immortal is missing also feels load-bearing eventually once we actually decide. Let's clarify the payment. The immortals left their families behind. They left their businesses behind. They left their lives behind. So the payment was personal. The payment was personal for each. So each of them might even view it differently. So let's just get that kind of in there. It's just this idea of they knew they were going to be pushed ahead in time. Now, we could pursue the question of why it's a time-based thing. I don't know. Time travel is always fun, right? Time travel is always fun. Let's also try to think about the immortals a little bit. What do they reflect in the story? Is this kind of like a god? Or let's go ahead and go with the cultural thing, the mountain thing first. The number 6 should be significant to the mountain-based culture. Whether that culture even still exists anymore is undecided. But I think it would make sense for the number 6 to retain its significance. The number 6 should show up in other places, likely as a result of that culture's influence. Maybe it was a major trade route. Maybe that was like if you're passing through the mountains, you had to go through that city. Maybe the mountain city was part of a trade route and the only reliable path through the mountains. Is there anything else I can do? Let's think about I'm trying to think about the immortals. I'm trying to make a decision here because especially the one who was forgotten. The obvious path seems like you have the one who was forgotten have like the ego trip about it of like, how could they forget me? I saved the world. So maybe this is somebody who already naturally had a chip on their shoulder and they're going to be the villain of the story. Like that's the really obvious tropey path, right? On the other hand, maybe it's the selfless one who was forgotten, and maybe it's one of the others who's upset on their behalf. Maybe it's siblings. There we go. 2 of the immortals are siblings. One of them is the forgotten one. The forgotten one doesn't mind being forgotten, but the other sibling does mind. That's a really interesting thing. To complicate things further, the remembered sibling is mythologized as a sibling to the immortal they hate. There we go. There we go. That's a really interesting dynamic here, is like not just that. So it's just like your brother gets forgotten from the story and you're pissed that your brother got forgotten. And then to make matters worse, now, oh, that's my sister? Oh, hell nah. You know? So the remembered sibling is mythologized as paired with someone they hate, not their actual sibling who was erased. So the mythology has assigned them a false intimacy, a false kinship with someone who they may have had a real conflict with. And their actual sibling, the one who they clearly like care about, is just gone from the story, being replaced in this mythology. And it's funny because the forgotten sibling doesn't mind being forgotten. Like maybe that person was completely at peace with the decision they made. They understood that like saving the world as they knew it was more important. Payment being personally different for each means 7 people made 7 different sacrifices that are now bound together by a shared act they may not even describe the same way. Some may feel that they gave up everything. Some may feel they escaped something. That's an interesting point. One of them actually did want to leave, maybe. And this is what I'm talking about. Like that idea right there, maybe I would have thought of that on my own. Maybe I wouldn't have. You can see in this process, I thought of that just now because of AI, because it dangled out a possibility that I latched onto. Meanwhile, there's so many possibilities in this whole process that I'm just like skipping past and not even considering. That's why I'm so conflicted about this whole thing, is this feels like it's enhancing my own process. And also, this is a group that has had no time to process. They just got thrown into the future. The loss of whatever they gave behind was still fresh, and the world doesn't care, much like the world doesn't care normally, you know? So the mountain culture and the number 6 feel like it has 2 separate origins that converge, the 6 from the mythology and the 6 that already meant something to the mountain people. Whether those are the same 6 or not is an interesting open question. The trade route detail matters because it means the mountain passage wasn't just a filter for the story, it was a place where the story would have been told and retold to travelers. The mythology may have spread along commercial lines as much as cultural ones. That's an interesting point. So let's go ahead and let's keep exploring the history. When the original group traveled west, the storyteller was old. Maybe he or she was the only one still really telling the story of this group that made a sacrifice that saved everyone, that saved the world. Maybe they found an apprentice while in the mountain town, but they passed away and their apprentice carried on the story. The apprentice didn't remember the story perfectly. This allows a way to account for the forgotten immortal as well as the emphasis on the number 6. This wasn't an intentional act. It was a natural and perhaps inevitable mistake given the circumstances. This apprentice traveled west with the group, which is why the origin of the mythology is believed to have come from the west. But due to its influence by this apprentice, it would have naturally resonated with the people of the mountain city. Note, I may conflate immortals by referring to both the group of people and to the mythology. But let's throw that out there because I'm thinking about both at once and I'm also talking to you guys at the same time. We took the human approach. It's not like this intentional, like let's get rid of somebody. It's literally just somebody did the best they could to carry on a story that touched them for some reason. And it's funny that I'm focusing so much on the history. I feel like almost every world building session I've done so far has gone in a completely different direction, right? There's like one that I did and I focused on like story. There's one where I was focused almost strictly on geography. There's one where I focused entirely on I guess like this one, religion and mythology is kind of the ballpark we're in, but I'm also thinking very much about like the human group of immortals being a very relevant thing because any story that gets told is going to focus on them ultimately. So we're still kind of in a backstory stage right now. One thing that we're obviously worth pointing out, like the apprentice is not from the original event. They're the first person for whom this is already, I'm going to interrupt myself just a second. If you've been listening to this instead of watching, I've been bouncing between my own words and reading the AI response, and that's probably getting a little bit conflated with whatever you're hearing, so good luck if that's how you're listening to this. The apprentice wasn't there for the original history. It was already history when it hit them, and they just inherited the story. So they became one link in the process. And naturally, like once, you tell a story to somebody, they retell the story. It's a game of telephone, right? That's one way to think about it. The apprentice traveled west with the survivors. That means they were present for the journey. They knew these people, the grieving displaced survivors of the Eastern City, and still the story drifted, which suggests the survivors either weren't telling the story themselves or their telling wasn't the one that stuck. And that's an interesting point. Maybe it wasn't just this one leader figure, I guess, who would have been telling the story who somehow won over this like young kid, teenager, young adult, whoever this person was. And we don't even need to explore that necessarily. This is the kind of thing where whatever comes out of this whole world building exercise could influence a story. It would be AI influenced, but the fingerprints wouldn't be there in a typical way, which is the point I was originally making when I opened this video. So for whatever reason, the apprentice's version outcompetes any firsthand accounts that might matter. If this truth ever somehow came out to these immortal survivors, there's not even anybody to be angry about because it's an understandable human mistake. Whether that, factors into the story, whether it doesn't, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. If you've done any world building on your own, you know just how many tiny details get included in your backstory that never touch the story itself. And this is the thing that I'm talking about AI having this like visible factor in writing. Because AI research, I think everyone understands that there are writers who are using AI research, but something like this that's inherently hitting a story is also going to be invisible. And if a writer did something like this and they don't disclose the process, there's no way to know. There's no way to prove, yes, they did, no, they didn't. I want to start adding some just like major material in here. Let's think about the immortals in the present day. Maybe the immortals gained immortality as a result of the process. So not only did they leave their past lives behind with whatever thoughts and feelings they had about that, but now they're going to live forever, or potentially forever. I'm not decided. They're immortal to some capacity, right? We haven't decided if they can still be killed, if they're just living an unnaturally long lifespan, something. The direction I was going with that is kind of like, that's its own potentially bittersweet thing. For one or more of them, that might itself be bittersweet. So they reach a settlement near the ruins of the city they once lived in. And the interesting question now is, do the people in this settlement know the mythology? Do they even share the mythology, or is it just not something that comes up? It's just like, oh, you guys are travelers, welcome. Maybe the immortals get welcomed in. Maybe the mythology isn't even mentioned here. It is, after all, mythology, a fable, a fairy tale, something like that. And so they enter this settlement and they're just trying to adapt to the new world. This group of mortals is just trying to get their bearings. They decide they want to continue on to an actual city. Maybe they continue along the coast. Let's have them get to a city that they actually do remember, that has actually survived. Let's say that city was razed and rebuilt. Some sort of war affected it in the intervening centuries. But when the immortals knew this city, it was just a settlement. Maybe it was a military outpost. Like, it wasn't even an actual city. I think that adds some like really interesting thing. Like, okay, it was a military target potentially. The immortality arriving as a consequence rather than a precondition changes the texture considerably. They didn't volunteer for, well, I haven't decided if they volunteered for forever. Come on, AI, keep track of things. They volunteered for displacement and forever came with it. But that is an interesting point, right? So my thought was that immortality was part of the price. Maybe they didn't know immortality was part of the price. Maybe this is something they discover through the process. Maybe one of them almost gets killed in this new world they enter, and they're just like, oh snap, we can't die now. I don't know if that's interesting necessarily, but it's an idea. The argument AI is giving is like, you don't know you're immortal until enough time passes that you should have aged and haven't. So the settlement near the ruins is a good grounding moment, ordinary hospitality, no recognition. The mythology exists somewhere to the west as fable, and here they're just strangers who arrive from the direction of the cursed place, which might itself warrant some unease from the locals, but not reverence, just wariness or curiosity. Now, the city they knew as a military outpost would be a place they have a memory of, to some degree or another. Maybe one of them was military and was stationed there at one point. That would be a really interesting point. The bones might be there if they know how to look. A street that curves the same way, a hill that's still in the same place, but the city layered over it. So I actually want to go with that. One of the immortals should have served in the military during the past era. This immortal was at one time stationed at the outpost that is now a thriving city in the present era. The coast ride implies that they're traceable. Anyone watching strangers move up the coastline from the direction of the ruins might draw conclusions or might not. That depends on how like fantasy we want to get with this. It's always interesting. Like, I think about Wheel of Time and how crows would like be spying on all the good guys throughout the story. And so you could have a case that there is actually somebody who's like, keeping an eye on these ruins. Maybe it's like a scientist or an archaeological group. Ways to go with it. You know, I mean, archaeology is a good thing to consider too, is like maybe there was actually an archaeological group at that city as a site. Maybe they touched the wrong panel or something and they trigger the immortals showing up in the present. Very tropey, but definitely an idea. We've also established that there were historic conflicts in the intervening centuries. These immortals are arriving in a new world where they don't know what's going on. There's parts they recognize, but parts they clearly don't. And there's also the interesting question of, you know, what was the military outpost guarding or controlling? Was it a port? I mean, let's go with the obvious answer if it was a port. The coastal city, formerly military outpost, was and still is a major port. In the past, for whatever reason, there wasn't a reason to justify a strong civilian population. That's why it was just a military outpost. This also kind of suggests, and we could do some research here, you know, in the process if we wanted to, but maybe it suggests that there's like a cove or something about the natural like water in this area makes it very like accessible to ships. I haven't thought about like shipping and travel and geography and trade routes and all of that a whole lot in a hot minute. We should have some names for people. Let's start giving some tentative names to people and places. The immortal siblings are named, I want some good names here is the problem. I almost had something on the tip of my tongue. It was like a little bit of a medieval style name. Let's go with Clint and Nathan. Nathan is the one who was forgotten. The non-sibling who is now conflated as being Clint's sibling is named Selena. Why not? I'm not happy with these names. We're just going to kind of throw them in so I have something to latch onto. And we're also going to say I may forget these names. The former military outpost, now port city, is called, gosh, we'll go with a very stupid seaside. Very generic, but whatever. It's an easy name to remember. The ancient city, now cursed ruins, is called Neosha. My brain was trying to go with like Neo something, and I was like, why would it be a new place as an old place? Like, come on. This is just a good way to keep track of things. Oh, we didn't have the military immortal is named. Just go with Olive. Not a good variety of names on my part. Names are the fun, normally the most fun part, but I just need to throw stuff out that we can remember right now for this session. Noted in all of these, I'll treat them as provisional and working until you confirm otherwise. Olive arriving at Seaside has a specific texture. She knew this placement is functional, purposeful, and small. She may have known the rhythms, watch rotations, supply schedules, the particular loneliness of coastal posting. Obviously, for Olive, being at this place would be bringing back memories, but in like a really twisted, really bittersweet way. And the question is, for somebody who's military, do we go with like the traditional tropey, like cold and distant, or is this like emotional because how long was she stationed at what was Seaside called in the past? Suddenly, it's no longer like military vessels, even it's like merchant vessels. The fortifications might have been raised during the war, or they might have become new civilian architecture. I actually kind of really like that idea. I like the idea that one of the major barracks is now like a town hall or something. Maybe instead of a town hall, maybe it's a major commerce center. Like that feels like it would be such a good corruption of its purpose, right? Olive should view this as an affront. You know, it bothers her. Because the thing is, I feel like if it's a town hall, you at least still see like it's a place where leadership is gathered. But now instead it's just this commerce hub. It's just, why are all these civilians in here selling everything when back in the day we were like doing military exercises and planning and that sort of thing? There's also the question of like, does anybody else really remember this place? Since it was a military outpost, probably not. Probably none of the other immortals in the group remember. But for all of it's hitting her different. And this is probably also the place where they first hear the fables, the mythology. So the sibling dynamic we've set up means Clint is carrying anger on Nathan's behalf that Nathan isn't carrying himself. When they eventually encounter the mythology, Clint will see his brother replaced by Selena in the story, and Selena will be standing right there. Which is also an interesting question, is who's going to hear the story first? Do they all hear it as a group? Does like one of them hear it or a couple of them hear it? How tightly are they all sticking together? What's the dynamic look like? If we're doing this from like a strictly stories perspective, you know, if we do all the story planning, are we going to like really emphasize the tension between Clint and Selena? I also didn't specify that there's a modern name, which I suppose I should, which yeah, is the thing that AI is pointing out here, is just like, you said Neosha, you didn't specify the name has changed. So maybe it is the same. Maybe we corrupt the pronunciation a little bit. Maybe eventually I think of something more creative. I mean, I'm going to drop this whole session at the end of the video anyway, but you know, if I was pursuing it, for example. And Seaside is functional as a present tense name. It doesn't carry the weight of the old military installation, which means the city has deliberately moved away from that identity. Maybe the rest of the changes to the outpost don't bother all. It makes sense. There's still ships here. That's still at least right. The land still looks the same. Maybe it's the one thing that gets to Olive, but it's this specific change, this one surviving ancient building that gets to Olive. Someone in the group should feel the opposite way. One of them should be glad to see Seaside thriving instead of a past military outpost. Maybe there's some history here. Maybe in their time there were debates about whether or not to have it continue being a military outpost versus making it into a commercial port. Maybe Neosha. Let's have it be like Neosha's this center of an empire or something. This is kind of an interesting also a shift here. Is now we're kind of thinking of it, instead of just being a city and an apocalypse level event, it's an empire. So maybe Neosha's empire held a tight grip militarily, and maybe the people wanted to push towards a freer approach. I may be phrasing that poorly. Let's go ahead and say that. Let's go ahead and like acknowledge I may be phrasing that poorly, right? Which clarifies something about Neosha. It controlled a region. The decision to sacrifice the immortals was about maintaining an empire. This empire still ended up falling despite that. Maybe that's why the curse plays in, right? So maybe the idea is this place is cursed because it's actually like it's viewed as this historical center of war. So like we've now gone from like military outposts on the one hand to actually the place that's viewed militarily is actually the ruins now. This group, they sacrificed their lives as they understood it. Maybe for the empire, all of being military, maybe for the empire, for the brothers, maybe for family, or maybe the brothers just saw it as doing something meaningful for their lives. You know, maybe somebody else also wanted like their name immortalized, and maybe they're the one who's remembered in the mythology. The great irony is they preserved it past the apocalypse level event, but the world that they thought they were saving ended up falling apart anyway, because that's just reality. Nothing's permanent. But it also means that rather than a very tightly controlled empire, the modern day is very much in contrast with that, because the modern day is now you've got this like huge commercial town, whereas the commercial district of Neosha would have been the one that mattered. Now they're seeing that, well, this whole thing got resolved without us. Like Olive remembers that it was a military place. One of the others sees that it became a commercial district. And what does the one who wanted the port to exist feel? Do they care that it happened with or without them? Do they care they weren't remembered? Let's name him Victor, which is a very on the nose name. The immortal who wanted the the outpost to become a commercial hub is named Victor. He specifically agreed to the sacrifice so that his name would be remembered, but nowhere and no one in Seaside seems to remember. I mean, this is what leads to the group discovering the mythology. Maybe his name has been corrupted in mythology. Gosh, what's the origins of the name Victor? So like Victor means winner. I'm thinking about like Victor, if you like put an accent on it, Vic could sound like beak. And so maybe it's like a bird analogy comes in here, or his appearance. He's now known as Victor, same pronunciation, but he's associated with birds. He's a bird god or something. This just seems like a funny idea. He's portrayed with wearing feathers. Maybe he's a patron saint. Maybe he's a patron saint to farmers for their chickens. Can you imagine you give up your life as you know it to be remembered, to have your name immortalized, and it happens, but not in the way you want. It's one of those like monkey paw deals almost. It's one of those, you make a wish and the genie is like, you didn't say how you wanted your name to be remembered. And so now this guy just gets the present. He has like no relation to this town, and he's the patron saint of chickens and farmers. This should infuriate him. He was an aspiring politician or some such during the past era. Here's the thing, we just deep dived on this one character. He specifically wanted to be remembered. He gets it, but you're the god of Bakar. You're the god of Bakar. You know, you've got this like association that got made somewhere along the way. I haven't even decided where this association came from along the way in the history either. Maybe the bird imagery was significant to mountain culture. I'm thinking this came from somewhere else, but I don't know. We'll see. Or maybe there was already mythology about some sort of like avian association in mountain culture. That's maybe. Gosh, we could follow the entire path of like, maybe it actually started off as this really grand perspective where like the mountain culture was like, eagles are the most impressive and magnificent of the gods' creations. And so originally Victor was known as like a bird god, like this, and it was like this big respectful thing. But somewhere along the way, one of the other places along the way was like, we need a patron saint of chickens. Maybe their existing god gets corrupted alongside Victor and it comes together in one. That would be a scene. I think the AI is rightly pointing out, like the moment you find that out, the moment we kind of establish that, like you gotta embrace that beat for a hard minute. And the way he discovers this matters. It might be the thread that leads to the group discovering the mythology. So Victor's looking for like anything about himself because he cares about that. He's like, I was promised I'd be remembered, but our city is gone. This new city has risen up in its place, which I wanted to have happen. Why doesn't anyone know my name? Maybe Victor's a common name too, like to change everything else. Or maybe people have been giving him weird looks up to that point, like your name is Victor? I do need to clarify, it wasn't that he wanted to be remembered in Seaside specifically. Well, I mean, he got there and he wanted to be remembered there. Where do we go from here? I'm not sure where we go from here, and I do want to keep this video from dragging on like too long, because like obviously I've tracked a lot of ground, and it's entirely possible with AI to just be like, hey, give me a recap, give me a document. Here's the short version, right? A group of 7 people made a sacrifice to avert a continental scale catastrophe. The sacrifice displaced them forward in time, instantaneous from their perspective, several hundred years in objective time. The exact number of centuries is undecided. The sacrifice was organized under the authority of Neosia, a city that controlled a regional empire. The empire fell in the intervening centuries regardless of the sacrifice. The payment was personal and different for each person. They left behind their families, lives, and former selves. Immortality was not part of the agreement. That's undecided, and that's the AI jumping a little bit ahead of me. Like this prompt's not perfect, but you get the, like, you can see how it's consolidating these ideas. We've gone through a process that was very open-ended in a lot of ways, and it was AI holding up a mirror of like, this is what you're telling me and what I am hearing, and here's some directions you could go and explore that. The question I've been left with every time I've done this is like, how much of me, like this story, the ideas I've gone here for, they have my DNA throughout the entire thing, but I also wouldn't have gotten here as quickly, and maybe some of the details would have been different if not for using AI in this process. And right now we only have the whole like AI assisted language, but I feel like people aren't describing all the different ways that AI can be incorporated into world building and that sort of thing. And so I'm very curious, you know, for those of you who have been kind enough to stick around to this point in the video, like, what do you, like, did you even know AI could be used this way? Like, did you realize this is possible? Because here's the thing, if I didn't show this process, if I wasn't being transparent about it, and I decide this is going to be the start of my new book, and I'm going to release that book, it would be trust system, it would be honor system. And if this is my first video you're watching on this channel, first off, thank you, welcome, it's good to have you here. But you don't know me, if you just saw a book that's telling the story, you might think this is an interesting story. And if there's no disclosure about like, well, AI was used during the world building process and it was used in this specific way, you wouldn't know. And I feel like most people, when they hear like, oh, AI was used, the question is kind of like, was it just used for like research purposes? Did it create ideas itself? What ideas did it create? Was this the AI's idea? Because this story doesn't feel like something AI would churn out on its own. This happened because of the back and forth. It happened because of the interaction. And I'm so conflicted and uncertain, and I've been thinking about this for like a month now, maybe, right? I did a live stream recently on Twitch, and I didn't have the time to really go into like how the whole process was going on. It was just like me and my chat throwing ideas into a blender together, and we came out with something that was a very different story. And so, I mean, the AI is busy giving like every point that I just made. We have all like the names still being provisional, all of like the questions that are still open. On the one hand, it feels like, if you go onto YouTube right now, right, you watch a video, there's the AI videos, you can tell like that's 100% like some person just threw in like hey, write me a story about people who get displaced, get thrown into the future. And it wouldn't come up with this. But then you also have the AI videos where the wrongness of them is a lot more subtle. It's like the structure is too clean, or there was a human who did a lot of the editing, or the AI edited a human script and you can't necessarily tell where one stops and the other begins. And the world's changed. And I don't know what to make of all of that. And I appreciate you sticking around through this whole video, and I'd love to hear what you think. I'd love to hear, I don't like, is a process like this ethical? Is it the future? Is this just what we expect now? Is it going to be the case where books, movies, video games, 10, 20 years, however far down the road, where it's about like, well, I care that it's a really good story, I don't care that it involves AI? Or is it going to be like any AI use is still bad? Or where do we end up? And I want to have that conversation. That's the thing I've been craving, because I don't know. And everyone I've been talking to just seems so yes or no about it. And I'm sorry I can't leave on like a cleaner thought. I'm sorry I can't leave on a sense of here's some optimism about the future, or here's some pessimism about the future, because I see both sides of that. On the one hand, a process like this has the potential of some of the richest stories that have ever been told, because of the sheer speed that we went through this, even on just an hour, because of the AI being able to kind of be like, hey, look in like these different directions that you might not have noticed on your own. Like you saw moments of that happening with me in real time. But on the other hand, it means that like true authentic storytelling in the way that we knew it is gone. And it probably disappeared without us even noticing it happened. Like if we looked at books released over the past year, 2 years, like how long ago was this possible? I was screwing around with AI and said, hey, I just want to see if I can make a world building prompt to play around with world building exercises, because that would be fun. And then I realized, oh, if somebody wants to use AI and wants to be deceptive about it and wants to get away with it, this is one path to that. Share your thoughts in the comments. That's all I got. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here.